Animal welfare is maintained by the 5 freedoms, which ensure that we meet the mental and physical needs of animals in our care. The 5 freedoms are currently expressed through 1. Freedom from hunger or thirst. 2. Freedom from discomfort. 3. Freedom from pain, injury, or disease. 4. Freedom to express normal behaviours. And 5. Freedom from fear and distress. These freedoms are met through having ready access to fresh water and a diet to maintain their full health and vigour, by providing an appropriate environment including shelter and a comfortable resting area, through prevention or rapid diagnosis and treatment of disease, and through providing sufficient space, proper facilities, and company of the animal's own kind. This is also through ensuring conditions and treatment which avoid any kind of mental suffering. The origins of the freedoms come from 1965 by Bramble and were designed for livestock to ensure they could lie down, stand up, move around, and to be able to stretch their limbs or groom themselves. Zoos implement the 5 freedoms through enrichment, veterinary access, and adequate nutrition. All establishments that care for or exhibit animals have to abide by these legislations and agreements. The Zoo Licensing Act of 1981 states that a collection needs a zoo licence if they are open for more than 7 days to the public, no matter if they are free or chargeable. The aim of this is to give the animals a suitable environment in which to express their most natural of behaviours. A zoo is defined as any establishment where animals of wild species are exhibited to the public. To get a zoo licence, you are inspected on the first year of opening. You must be re-inspected 6 months prior to licence renewal. Licences are granted initially for a period of 4 years, then this can be extended to 6 years on reapplication. The local authority is in charge of giving licences. A veterinary surgeon attends along with the inspectors whilst surveying the zoo to see if it can get the licence. The Zoo Licensing Act requires the inspection and licensing of all zoos in Great Britain. The Act aims to ensure that where animals are kept in enclosures, they are provided with a suitable environment to provide an opportunity to express the most natural and normal of their wild behaviours. Another piece of legislation that regulates the welfare of animals within zoos is the Dangerous Wild Animals Act of 1976. The legislation is here to regulate the keeping of certain types of wild animals. They have their own 5 freedoms with different wording, but are mostly the same in terms of principle. The Dangerous Wild Animals Act states that all zoos must have a member of staff, not on site always, but on call at hand whenever needed, with firearms training. They must also have security measures in place in case of any wild animal escapes. Alongside these legislations of welfare, there are national advice and policies on zoo welfare practice. These are mainly coordinated by BIAZA, IAZA, and DEFRA. BIAZA's strict policies for welfare cover the maintenance of physical and mental health, social interaction, participation in improved managed breeding programs. They have a strict policy on how to carry out euthanasia, and there must be sufficient amount of enclosure space and environmental enrichment. Zoos must be involved in education, they must be involved in conservation, and must be involved in research and biological scientific studies. They must also maintain an appropriate program of training for any animal keeping staff. IAZA has strict policies which include mainly the comfort and well-being of their animals, social group management, encouragement of natural behaviours, furnishing and enrichment within enclosures, and on mixed exhibits. DEFRA's strict policies include 5 principles. 1. The provision of food and water, including presentation and frequency of feeding as well as nutritional balance. 2. Provision of suitable environment, which includes shade and shelter from heat, cold and rain. 3. Provision of animal health care, which covers enclosure design to minimise risk of injury, as well as care being taken with mixed exhibits to minimise risk of harm to each other. 4. Disease, where a hygienic environment and veterinary medicine must be provided to the animals to prevent disease. And 5. Provision of opportunity to express normal behaviour. You don't have to be a member of any of these organisations to actually qualify as a zoo. You can just do it under the Zoo Licensing Act. The main roles of a zookeeper include feeding and grooming animals, cleaning and maintaining the areas the animals inhabit, observing and interacting with animals, training and handling of the animals, working as part of a team of keepers, educating visitors, designing enrichment activities to maintain the quality of life and improve the physical health and conditions of the animals, administering basic healthcare and medical treatments for animals such as injections, deworming, antibiotics and anaesthesia. They must keep records of animals' health, nutrition and behaviour, as well as prepare diet sheets for animals based on their individual dietary needs. They must also assist in the design, construction and maintenance of any animal enclosures and habitats, and complete daily medical and husbandry records for each animal, as well as maintaining any current animal files. Through the use of databases such as the Zoological Information Management System, which shares information and keeps record of zoo species and stud books across many of the European and worldwide zoos. Welfare standards are assessed through a variety of different means. However, good welfare standards tend to show that animals exhibit behaviours that are expected of them. They socialise with other animals well, they have no health or nutritional ailments, and they have enrichment that they use in their enclosures. Characteristic behaviours displayed by animals in captivity include feeding anticipation such as pacing, trained behaviours to receive rewards such as being cute or performing tasks, circling due to boredom, swaying back and forth, bar or cage biting, self-mutilation, over-grooming, neck twisting, vomiting, and it can vary between individuals and between species. Coprophagic behaviours such as eating their own feces, root tracing, head bobbing, aggression, weaving, lethargy or depression, hyperactivity, wind sucking, mouthing, or floating limb syndrome, as well as other symptoms like hair loss. In this study, we mainly focused on the meerkats as a species, in the location of Camperdown Wildlife Centre in Dundee. In their natural environment, the meerkats as a species maintain their nutritional requirements, mainly through things like insects, small mammals or rodents, fruit, lizards, snakes, scorpions, spiders, eggs, millipedes, centipedes, sometimes but rarely small birds, as well as plants, fungi and snails. Contrastly, in captivity, the species' nutritional needs are mainly met through the use of mealworms, chicks, mice, eggs, corn on the cob, whole squashes, cat kibble, crickets, ferret feed, avocado, apples, ground meat such as beef, oat cereal, vegetables like carrot and sweet potato, and sometimes they are supplemented with calcium supplements. Pumpkin as well as watermelon can be stuffed with other things, but most diets are primarily veg orientated. Presentation strategies of food are important for meerkats, especially while in captivity. Keepers will scatter feed the insects to simulate the forage. They will use enrichment like termite mounds or tunnels and holes to store the feed in to simulate logs or cracks that insects can hide in. They will bury food in order to allow natural attainment, such as digging and burrowing. By placing whole fruits and veg into the enclosures, this allows the group to work as a team to access and simulate the process of a forage. The keepers will often hide food. Meerkats are foragers, and hiding the food in their enclosure encourages natural feeding behaviours. And they will drill holes into things like logs and stuff them with food in order to allow the meerkats to use their natural digging through their claws. Stuffing things like Kong dog toys or pine cones with food will also simulate this. And providing live insects. This gives them nourishment from their primary diet and also provides enrichment, as the insects themselves must be caught. The use of things like meat with fur, such as sections of horse meat or beef, can be given. Apart from providing roughage, it also changes the texture of the food and increases the length of feeding activity. In the wild, meerkats must operate as a unit in order to attain nourishment, whether it's taking down a rattlesnake or a scorpion, or simply digging to find bulbs or roots. The rationale behind these strategies is to try to incorporate as much of the meerkat's natural abilities that they would normally express in the wild, but in a captive setting. Many factors can lead to uncharacteristic behaviours in zoo animals. These behaviours can sometimes appear to be cute from a public perspective, but are usually discouraged as they can often lead to stress. Here we will discuss this in 3 captive species, representing the carnivores as the Asian short-clawed otters. Uncharacteristic behaviours displayed by this species includes coming to the edge of their enclosure and begging for food by grasping and vocalising. This happens mainly when they're fed at the same time of day and don't get enough keeper interaction out with feeding times. In-pack fighting, which happens when there's a lack of or need for a social structure and the animals struggle to form dominant pairs. Neck twisting. This has not been studied much to find a root cause, but it can be attributed to a lack of enrichment and stress in the environment. Over-grooming and hair plucking as a result of stress from lack of forage opportunities and aggression from other otters. Pacing, mainly from anticipation around regular feeding times. And other forms of general anticipatory behaviours. Representing the omnivores, we of course have the meerkats. Uncharacteristic behaviours from meerkats come mainly from hand-rearing, close keeper interaction, and these can lead to things like fearlessness towards humans. High levels of stress can lead to uncharacteristic aggression and sometimes cannibalism of young, which can mainly derive from things like issues with dominance or the hierarchical issues. And aggression can come from interpack confinement. In wild, issues would be naturally resolved from exclusions from gangs. This can be resolved by having solely male collections. All female ones don't seem to work as much because the females are dominant and drive the gang, but also cause most of the aggression. Representing the herbivores, we have goats. Goats become stressed when isolated. They need to be kept in groups to avoid this. They can sometimes exhibit behaviours such as self-suckling, mainly when they abort late in pregnancy. Treatment for this involves behavioural and environmental enrichment, as well as social companionship that's stable before pregnancy. Alternatively, some anti-anxiety medications can also help this. Goats can be known to be destructive of their environment. This occurs when there's not suitable enrichment within the goat's environment to take up most of its time. Males will vocalise uncharacteristically due to frustration during breeding seasons, primarily from if they're not kept in close proximity to females. And lastly, they can show aggression or butting. This only happens if the introduction of new goats is not done correctly and the social structure isn't there. Abnormal behaviours are usually functionless, and it is commonly known that animals usually express them as a way of coping with a stressor, such as impoverished environment, boredom, or unhappiness. In terms of hand-rearing, this can sometimes manifest uncharacteristic behaviours in captive animals. The animals tend to imprint on their human keepers and become dependent on contact multiple times a day. Animals may have issues interacting with others of their kind as a result of primarily human contact if they're isolated from their own species as a result. Animals may not be able to rear their own young effectively as they were never reared by their own species themselves. They also may uncharacteristically have no fear of humans, which can also be a danger. Especially in meerkats, due to the extremely social nature of the species, it's not recommended that individuals be hand-reared. Hand-reared pups may become aggressive towards caregivers as they get older and do not make good ambassador animals as a result. We have several methods that they employ to prevent the onset of these displays of uncharacteristic behaviours in captive wild animal species. To prevent feed in anticipation, we feed at different times of day so the animal doesn't know when to expect it. As well as this, they will have fast days where they are not fed to simulate their habitat and food scarcity. Zoos attempt to prevent stress as much as possible, and they attempt to cater to all aspects of the animal's social, mental, behavioural, environmental and nutritional requirements as a result. This is primarily done through enrichment and understanding of the animal's behaviours in the wild in order to improve welfare within captivity. Once attained, it is difficult to get rid of uncharacteristic behaviours. However, things like larger enclosure sizes, increased or varied enrichment, and foraging or grooming devices have been known to decrease reoccurrence. As such, these things can prevent the onset of the behaviours as well, and should be implemented from the start of the animal's life to succeed. All of these basic needs must be met to maximise prevention of uncharacteristic behaviours in future. At present, a lot of the main feeding methods for the meerkats are to be scatter-fed or to use the termite mounds enrichment with snacks. This can be harder for them to all access at once, and they lose interest in it as it's a constant presence within their enclosure. The use of the termite mound is minimal as a feeding mechanism, and so putting a temporary enrichment in will stimulate interest and cause them all to use it as a primary source of nourishment, whilst it's in the enclosure. This is why the enrichment that I chose was one that allowed them to utilise their skills to attain their food. A temporary enrichment that catches their attention whilst it's in the enclosure, and after time it's removed so they don't become used to it. The use of the bottles as containers for the food stimulates their natural environment, as they must either spin or shake the bottles for food to come out. They can also put their hands inside the bottles and dig out the food with their long claws, thus simulating their natural habitat. They must work for it and use their abilities in order to get out the food, and this is what they would also do in the wild: innovate, dig, claw things out of holes in order to get their food. We made the enrichment by designing a wooden structure that held a removable pole on which bottles could be slid onto easily. The pole was removable, and so the bottles could be taken off and cleaned, as could the pole. In conjunction with the joinery team at Dundee College, we constructed the enrichment through a series of designs that we came up with. We made the enrichment easy to use for the meerkats, and easy for them to get to know how to use. Once they figured out that the bottles dropped food when moved, they were much more interested in it. We put a ladder on the side of the enrichment just in case they wanted to use it as a perch or sentry duty. And we made a base that was wide and stable so as it wouldn't be wobbly in the sand in their enclosure. The filling inside the bottles that we used was straw to fill out, zoo feed, which is their normal feed, grapes, mealworms and dubia worms, as this is all their primary food that they get, and as such the enrichment could be used as standard meal replacements as a result. The grapes that we put in we actually squashed and dripped the juices inside the bottles to provide extra olfactory and sensory enrichment. From this diagram we can see that cats spend the majority of their time foraging. There's a higher level of interaction with enrichment, with playing and fighting close behind. Next to this is the sentry, and behind this is the lesser tasks of grooming, showing aggression or dominance, and interacting with visitors. These graphs show the average percentage of occurrences for each behaviour, and the average number of occurrences per behaviour, both before and after the enrichment was placed in the enclosure. We can see that before the enrichment was put in, grooming was a high occurrence, however after the enrichment was put in, there was no occurrences of it. Forage decreased drastically after enrichment was put in, and before the enrichment was in there was more playing, after there was none. Sentry declined as a result of the enrichment being put in, and because the enrichment was in there was no interaction with visitors. There were many more shows of aggression and dominance as a result of the enrichment being placed in, and of course a higher number of interactions with enrichment as a result. These welfare sheets are a good way to track and indicate if the needs of an animal is being fulfilled, and can be tracked over time. This one was recorded both on the 17th of April and the 24th of April, one before the enrichment went in and one after the enrichment went in. All of the animals' needs are being met, and this did not change after the enrichment went in. Camperdown Wildlife Centre has provided the meerkats access to water through the water bowl inside the hut, access to food through the daily feed and the enrichment they use for food, a comfortable and secure environment with the den and enclosure they're in, regular medical checkups and veterinary care, a barrier and a safe place to retreat to as protection from harm and distress, suitable substrate which could be thicker in some areas, and a suitable den or isolated space to retreat through that's easily accessible and provides shelter with tunnels inside. There are shaded areas in their enclosure and heated lamps in their den to allow correct temperature and ability to regulate, and many stimuli and enrichment such as logs, ball pits and termite mounds, as well as porches and sheltered areas. Thank you for watching my documentary, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to give credit to Dundee and Angus College, in particular the joinery department, to Camperdown Wildlife Centre, and to all the staff on the Zoo Animal Behaviour and Welfare course. Once again, thanks for watching.